The text that I'm going to be presenting on is The Luck of Roaring Camp by Bret Harte, and I'm the presenter for this, Danielle Reitz. The first thing I want to talk about is the author, Bret Harte. Bret Harte was born in 1835 and lived until 1910. He was born in New York in the Northeast, but he moved with his family to California, and he held a series of different kinds of jobs. His family, especially his father-in-law, had some sway with the government. He worked in the government, so Harte worked in the government also, but it really wasn't until he found his place as a writer that he enjoyed his jobs, and he started to do things like editing and working as a typesetter, things of that nature. And a lot of his success, a lot of the reasons people enjoyed his short stories were because they portrayed these very distinctive characters from the West. And at that time, people in the Northeast who were subscribing to these magazines like Harper's, where these short stories were appearing, they weren't that familiar with the West. They knew that there were all these kind of mining camps out there, and there was the gold rush going on, and they kind of romanticized it in their minds. And the Northeast was a little bit more settled and civilized, and they pictured this kind of Wild West that was out there. And so they enjoyed hearing about the fictionalized dramas of people in that area. The story The Luck of Roaring Camp was first published in Overland Monthly in 1868, which was a magazine not unlike, Time or Newsweek or Cosmopolitan. It was something that combined entertaining short stories alongside news and advertisements, things like that. But, the population during that time was pretty literate, and this is what they did for entertainment, was they read a lot of short stories. And Harte is distinctive and distinguished because he told stories about the West, but he often told them from this kind of ironic perspective that people who weren't familiar with California, it went kind of right over their heads. They didn't realize that he was being ironic, because they wanted to think of California and the West as like noble gamblers, and that old saying, like the hooker with the heart of gold. They wanted to romanticize it, but Harte and people who were from California knew that really there were, it was just kind of a tawdry area at that time because of all the lawlessness that existed and all of these mining camps. The historical context for that time was when the West was still in the process of being settled. So you're having, train tracks and the increase of the Industrial Revolution in the Northeast, and that's bringing a lot of commerce and industry to the eastern seaboard and to the Northeast in particular. But the West was still largely in the process of being settled. There weren't many things of what we might think of as civilized at that time in the West. And like I said, part of his appeal is that Easterners are reading about these areas and they're kind of wondering about them. And regional writing, which kind of has a boom during this time, during 1865 and during the time Harte is writing. So people are writing about the Northeast or the Southeast or the Midwest, and the United States is really developing into kind of these more regional niche areas, and getting, these areas are getting their own identity. And so Harte, along with Twain, are kind of known for being these predominant regional writers and male, and they're two of the biggest names at that time. And regional writing was an expression of the realist impulse, which really sought to lay things down as they really were. Where writing before this might have been more romantic, and it was about reading about the best people could be and happy endings and things like that. But realistic writing was really about, no, we're going to tell it just like it is. Even if people are awful, we're going to show that they're awful. And we're going to just show that life can be hard and talk about every little detail in there. Some other major works by Hart is he wrote many articles for Atlantic Monthly magazine, and I think that should read 1871, not 1971. Sorry about that. He had a novel, Gabriel Conroy, that was published in 1876, but the critics didn't really like it, and not much else of his novel career was very successful. But he did have, that stint as a regional short story writer where he was very popular. These are some discussion questions, and these are just some ideas to get you going or thinking about the story. You don't have to answer these. This is if we were all together, some things we might talk about. And these also, along with the writing prompts that I have on the next slide, I believe it's the next slide, might give you ideas about, if you wanted to write about this short story, what you might write about. So, it says in the first 3 paragraphs of the story, what impression do you get of the camp? Is this story humorous? If so, how does Hart make it so? How is his humor similar to or different from Twain's? What is the significance of the title? Is the baby's christening just a joke to the camp? Why do you think the men want to keep the baby and change for him? One critic interprets the story as a parody of a biblical text, a retelling of the gospel story of the Nativity. Can you find a place that supports such an interpretation? Do you agree? And number 7, although this is considered realist literature, there seem to be moments of romanticism also. Do you agree or disagree? So again, you don't have to answer these questions anywhere. These are just some ideas, some things to get you thinking about the story. Perhaps some things you might even want to write about if you wanted to write about this story from one of your literary analysis papers or critical essay. Possible writing prompts. What motivates the men to keep and raise the baby? How does this story exhibit both characteristics of romanticism and realism? So this is a lot like what I just asked. Hart's original audience would have balked if not been outright scandalized about prostitutes and roughneck miners, yet his stories were very well received. Why do you think that is? Explain the significance of luck in the story. So again, I'm hoping that you'll kind of come up with questions, or even find questions. It's fine. You don't have to come up with all the questions on your own. You might find these discussion questions in some sources as you're reading about your story. But I think these will get your audience thinking a little bit. Some themes in the story are that parenthood transforms people, the good of the West, there's ethics even among roughnecks, kind of like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or, when we think about criminals, there are a lot of stories that say, oh yeah, they're, the Sopranos, they're bad people, they do these bad things, but they do have a code of honor. The birth of a child transforming the world, similar to Jesus' birth, that's a theme we see throughout the story. And are there any symbols or allusions or motifs in the story? These should be terms that you're familiar with because of ENC 1102, if you still have that book. If not, I will also link to these terms so you'll have an idea of what you're looking for. Symbols are things that represent ideas or concepts. So the child in the Luck of Roaring Camp can symbolize luck or the West or starting over. Allusions are places in the story where the author refers to books, figures, people, art, anything that his readers might be familiar with that exists in the real world. So he refers to this artist, Raffaello Sanzio, and he refers to these Greek characters, Romulus and Remus. So those are Greek mythological characters. Motifs are anything that occurs a lot in the story and repeatedly. So the word luck, the idea of luck, recurs throughout the story. There's a lot of swearing in the story. There are a lot of fights. There's a lot of references to God or atheists. There's a lot of references to nature. There are a lot of references to guns. So these are just all things that we see recur throughout the story. That's what a motif is. And my works cited, those are the two sources I used. My primary source, which is the story itself by Bret Harte, The Luck of Roaring Camp. And then my secondary source, I used my book and the information that it gave me about Bret Harte largely to compose this presentation. So again, I hope this gives you a model of what you might want to do. Obviously, you haven't read The Luck of Roaring Camp for this class, but I think you can still say, okay, these are the things that I want to include as I go through it. Please make sure to let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I'd be happy to answer them.